Hi everybody, it's the History Teacher. In this episode we'll look at the American Revolutionary War. Please see the description section for a link to another video in this series to find out about the causes of the American Revolution. In April 1775, British soldiers attempted to seize a stockpile of weapons in Concord, Massachusetts near Boston. Colonial militia, called Minutemen because they were expected to be ready to fight on a minute's notice, intercepted the British at Lexington and exchanged fire with them before skirmishing again at Concord. Colonial forces, despite being much smaller, compelled the British troops to return to Boston. The battles of Lexington and Concord inspired many other colonists to join the fight. The following month, 20,000 New England troops laid siege to the British garrison in Boston. Attempting to break the siege, the British attacked the colonials in the Battle of Bunker Hill. Although the British forced the colonists to retreat, British casualties were 1,154 men compared to 311 for the colonists. Bunker Hill gave colonial troops confidence that they could stand up to the better trained and equipped British forces. As the colonists were besieging Boston, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. New England delegates, including John Adams and his cousin Samuel Adams, argued for independence from Britain. But the delegates from the middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, for example, favored an attempt at reconciliation. That's because the economies of those colonies depended heavily on trade with Britain and its empire. Congress appointed John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, who opposed independence, to draft the so-called Olive Branch Petition, which offered peace to Britain on three conditions. First, an immediate ceasefire in England. Second, negotiations between the colonies and Britain to resolve differences. And third, the repeal of the coercive acts, that is, the intolerable acts. However, King George III received the Olive Branch Petition at the same time as news of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The king rejected the petition and soon afterward declared New England to be in a state of rebellion. In June 1775, Congress had created the Continental Army and appointed George Washington of Virginia as commander-in-chief of that army. Washington headed to Boston to assume command of the forces. At the same time, the British Army left Boston and moved to New York City, from which they would launch their effort to subdue New England, and which they occupied for the rest of the war. On January 1, 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet called Common Sense, which was read widely throughout the colonies. In Common Sense, Paine advocated political and economic independence for the colonies and urged Americans to form a new nation based on the principles of liberty and natural human rights. In June 1776, the Continental Congress agreed to a resolution of independence and appointed a committee to put their intentions in writing. The result was the Declaration of Independence, primarily written by Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. The Declaration was adopted on July 4, 1776. In it, the colonists announced a total separation from Britain, contending that Britain had violated its social contract with the colonists. The Declaration incorporated Enlightenment ideals such as democratic self-government, equality, liberty, and personal fulfillment. After declaring independence, all the new American states had to do was to defeat the most powerful nation on earth, Great Britain. The American states were at a considerable disadvantage. Their population was 2.5 million compared to about 11 million in Britain, and not all of the 2.5 million in America wanted independence. About 20% remained loyal to Britain. People who were enslaved felt no particular loyalty to Americans. For enslaved people, the goals of the Declaration of Independence, liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness, could only be obtained by escaping America rather than fighting for it. The British Army was experienced, well-led, and highly trained, and considered superior to any other. The British Navy ruled the waves. America's Navy didn't even exist. Still, the Americans were fighting for their homes, families, and their freedom, and the Revolution's leaders were fighting for their lives. If they were captured, then they could expect Britain would execute them. Further, American troops had greater familiarity with the terrain and didn't need to obtain supplies from across the Atlantic Ocean, as Britain did. During the second half of 1776, General Washington tried to dislodge British forces from New York, but was beaten back each time. Washington took the offensive by staging a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas Day, 1776, defeating a force of German mercenary troops. Washington followed up that victory with another one in Princeton. The British planned to divide and conquer the colonies, first by separating New England from the rest. However, that strategy was doomed after the British were defeated at Saratoga in New York in October 1777. More than 8,000 British troops surrendered. That astonishing result persuaded France to ally with America in its quest for independence. French economic and military support were crucial to ultimate American victory. By the end of 1780, Spain and the Netherlands allied with France against Great Britain. The Revolution in America had now become a significant European conflict. In December 1777, 11,000 American soldiers spent a harsh winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, which was comfortably occupied by the British Army. But while at Valley Forge, the American Army was trained by a professional, skilled, and highly vulgar German soldier named Baron von Steuben. Von Steuben couldn't speak English, but he knew how to train soldiers. By spring 1778, American forces had become a professional army. American soldiers used their new training at the Battle of Monmouth in New Jersey in June 1778, in which British forces were defeated. The British then shifted their focus to the South, correctly expecting greater support due to higher numbers of Loyalists living there. In the South, most of the battles were actually fought entirely by Americans on both sides, Loyalists versus Patriots. The British conquered Charleston, South Carolina in May 1780, and a few months later inflicted another severe defeat at Camden, South Carolina. For more than a year, British victories outnumbered defeats. However, Patriot forces kept fighting. They didn't need to conquer the British forces, they just needed to survive long enough for the British to give up. In the fall of 1781, the British had established a base near Yorktown in eastern Virginia. In October 1781, 2,500 French troops and a smaller American force laid siege to the British at Yorktown. Then the French Navy appeared. The British were trapped by soldiers on land and by a strong French Navy at sea. Judging their position hopeless, the British surrendered. 8 months later, peace negotiations began. After Yorktown, both Parliament and the British public just wanted the war to end. In September 1783, the British recognized American independence in the Treaty of Paris, ending a war that had lasted more than 8 years. British casualties in the Revolutionary War are estimated at 24,000. American casualties were about the same, specifically around 6,800 killed in battle, with another 17,000 dying from disease, most of whom while as prisoners of war. Although the letter was to his wife, John Adams specifically had us, you and me, in mind when in September 1777 he wrote, quote, "Posterity, you will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it." Okay, so that's the Revolutionary War. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.